I'm in Kansas City, Missouri, so it's great to meet you.
Ah, well, good to see you.
So, before we get into your life as a writer, I want to begin our conversation with 4 years ago, we were wrapping our head around a global pandemic. How did you get through the pandemic and how did it change you?
Well, because I'm a writer who sits at my desk a
Yeah,
lot of the
right?
time, um, and I was retired already from like teaching, going out to a day job. Um, Although I write full time, it didn't change the rhythm of my life all that much. Um, it mostly affected like my kids and my friends, and I would get cabin fever, and all the things that all the rest of everybody was getting.
Yeah.
But for me, I mean, it was frightening, but it didn't radically change. I actually was a really productive writer during it and published a couple books, and like it was not the dead end for me that it was for a lot of people.
So, if I put you in front of a bunch of third graders and you had to explain your career before retirement and what you do now, and they're like, what do you do for a living? How would you explain that to them?
Well, I would say that I write books,
Yeah,
and they enjoy stories, right?
yeah.
And that's what I do. I create stories for adults. So they're big books without pictures. That's what I would explain to third graders,
Yep.
and what I explain to my own grandson. Um, and I that means it's a full-time job. So I sit down in the morning when like when they see their mom and dad go out to a job. I sit down, my job is right there. I work all day, I take a lunch break, go for a walk or something to clear my head if I'm stuck, and then that's my day. And that part of that to make a physical book, you not only have to write all the words, but you have to create covers by contacting artists who can do that work, and you have to reach out to a lot of people so they'll want to read your books, and so you do a lot of marketing. And so part of my each of my day is sort of what I think of as my outward turning, as opposed to my writing. And also writing is a communal project in a lot of ways. I have critique partners and a community of other writers that I interact with and ask questions of and answer questions of and help them with their manuscripts. So part of most days also has a little piece of it that's somehow devoted to reaching out to other art writers. So
So
that's my job.
that's great. That's a great explanation. What did you want to be in the third grade? What was your dream to grow up and become?
Oh gosh. I don't think in third grade. I was definitely a booky person. Like
Yeah.
that was, I read a lot. I remember driving the librarian completely nuts because I wanted every pioneer story that had ever been written for children, blew through all the obvious choices, and then she was hunting for more. Um, I did not think I wanted to be a writer, and I didn't actually get the idea of being a fiction writer. I did a lot of writing professionally as a literary critic, and I was working in the world of literature, but not from the creative writing side, but
Yeah.
from the marketing and critiquing and teaching kids about understanding the world through literature and all that kind of stuff. So I had to learn how to write fiction. It's a really different kind of writing.
Yeah.
Um, and so when I stopped being a full-time teacher, I don't know how I know some full-time teachers who are also creative, fiction writers, and I don't know how they do that. I just, so much of my brain was taken up by interacting with my students about their own writing and all of that, that I wouldn't have had space, and then also been able to interact, be there with my own kids. So that was a post-retirement idea that happened, mostly because I had a question about a character
Yeah.
in a literary work that I had in the Iliad, oral epic poem. And I just wanted to find the answer, and there is no answer. Like, there's no place where, why did this woman love that man, even
Yeah.
though he trashed her life, doesn't have a, place where you can go read it in Wikipedia. It was an imaginary answer that came out of the tradition. And I realized the only way I was ever going to answer it for myself was to explore who she was. And I would need to write about her. And it took a lot of drafts of that before I was creating fiction that I wanted to share with anybody. So.
So let me ask you this. Was there a book growing up that was seminal, that was huge in your development, one that you remember that you revisit or you loved?
When I was really small, as I mentioned, pioneer stories, and I think that was probably, the Laura Ingalls Wilder, which is such a typical classic thing for an American girl of my generation to have grown up, and then to sort of graduate to things like Little Women. That was what was YA in my childhood. There wasn't. Now there's just like such great literature, such an abundance and much more diverse set of books. As an adult, when I went to college, and my graduate work and all was in ancient Greek literature and history. So the work that formed my thinking as an adult was the Iliad, which is about the Trojan War. So it's Greek mythology and these sort of iconic stories that are the backdrop to a lot of contemporary fiction today.
So who's been a hero for you in your life?
Well, I suppose partly my father, who
Mhm.
was a writer and a historian. So I saw growing up, somebody who sat at his desk, and in the evenings, I remember he had a big, large old-fashioned desk with, a cut through for his legs, and I would be on the floor in his study. There was like an old Oriental rug, one of those small ones that was sort of a little patchy here and there from a lot of, a couple generations of use. And I would sit there, and the cat would sit in his lap with her head poking up over, and it always looked like she was reading. I'm sure she was not, but as a child, I was sure that Chessie the cat and I were, participating in the production, and I would have a book or homework or whatever. So that's that. I think the way I live now got hardwired into me as something enjoyable and part of my sense of who I am that
Yeah.
way.
So if you could meet one writer that's alive right now and either interview, spend some time with them, pick their brain, who would it be?
Well, I guess right now that would be Natalie Haynes, and I do a lot of interviews and chatting with other authors. So I suppose it's possible that Natalie and I could cross paths. But she is a classicist like me, but she's also a stand-up comedian.
Oh,
She
cool.
has a whole BBC show. The two books of hers, the most recent books that I have really enjoyed, are Stone Blind and A Thousand Ships. And both are part of this Greek mythological tradition that got me sort of oomphed into the idea of writing. And what I love about her, she has a voice that's entirely her own. No
Yeah.
one, I couldn't imitate it. No one could imitate it. It's her. And I love reading something that fresh. It's a little snarky. It's very contemporary in terms of its sensibility about women. And Stone Blind, for example, is about Medusa, snaky
Yeah.
haired
Uh-huh.
mythological. She's always the bad guy. She's, excoriated as the monster. Well, not in this book. It's the hero who really is the jerk. If you really
Yeah.
get down to it, is kind of is the premise. It's a beautifully layered, complicated story. It does not reduce it to that simplistic a
Sure.
message, but that's kind of where she gets started with these myths, and I think that's fun. I
Yeah.
enjoy that.
So what is your daily motivation? What gets you out of bed? What gets you to make these stories, to write, to do all of these things that you do and evolve as a human?
Um, I find the process of writing, I get to know human beings in general much better
Yeah.
because I get to know these very specific individuals. They really come alive. You often hear writers say, "Oh, my characters talk to me," and they do, we are mildly crazy. There is a way in which they're kind of out there in a, they take on a being of their own. I mean, it's just an extension of my imagination, but it's a very real thing, and they'll contradict what I'll be writing a scene and struggle. And, my main character, the series that I'm just now publishing, the fourth and what's kind of the wrap up, the final book of this 4-book series. She is an ancient queen. She's based on an actual historic ancient queen. And it's about the early years of her rise to being a queen. And she would just come in and say, in my imagination, you are never going to get this scene right. Just stop trying to do it this way. It needs to be this way. I mean, she doesn't say it that way necessarily, but it becomes very clear that that's not the way this woman would act or behave. And I just have to listen and then go back and rewrite. So that's, I mean, it's perhaps a little insane, but it's also really engaging. Like that keeps my intellect and my heart just totally involved.
What's been your favorite fan letter?
My favorite fan letter. Well, I guess my fan letter would be my fan walk. We moved to Davis, California not so long ago. We lived in Arizona for almost all of my adult life. And when I moved here in the neighborhood, right down the street from me, I discovered my best friend, and she and I chat. I'll talk. She's not a writer, but I'll talk out things, and we have great fun. And I jokingly call her my #1 fan. She will literally stop people on our walk and say, "You have a book club, right? You should be reading her
That's
book."
right. That's what you need.
Yes,
That,
right.
that's great. So of all of these things that you've done in a very in a very full life, what are you the proudest of?
Well, I remember at a certain point thinking, I would really love to have a shelf of books that I had produced and that I was proud of. And I do have a shelf of books that I produced that I'm proud of. I would say that my family is way more important to me as a sort of life accomplishment. There's nothing that beats, kids that have grown up to be wonderful adults that you're super proud of. But professionally, and I had a lot of years of teaching and students that, that I really cared about. And that was a great thing, but it is really fun to write a book and to put yourself into it. And I really take care with mine. They're carefully edited. They go through lots of drafts. And I'm proud of them. So
Yeah. So at the end of the day, everyone has a perception of you, family, friends, all of your readers, but you run the show. What's your perception of you? Who do you think you are?
well, I'm a person who spends a lot of time in imagination. I'm gregarious. I'm choosing podcasts this time around as a way of promoting
Yeah.
Flights of Treason because I love to chat. It's fun. And I'm a teacher, so a lot of what I do is with other writers is teaching workshops and mentoring younger writers and or emerging writers. They're not always younger, but emerging. So I guess that combination. So I spend time with words,
Yeah.
either at my screen or in real life.
So if anyone wants to get your books, they want to reach out, they want to learn more about you, where's the best place to go?
Amazon is probably the easiest place. They can go to my website, judithstarkston.com. Very simple, my name and
Yeah.
that. And all of my books, the series that I've just May 7th published, the fourth one is called the Tesha series. The first one in the series is Priestess of Ashana. And now the last one is Flights of Treason. They can all be read as individual, standalone books. I'm pretty careful to write them that way. And they are a combination of history and fantasy. I write this very ancient queen from the Hittite culture, which most people don't know. It's a wonderfully exotic part of the ancient world. Her primary foe, to kind of frame it for people, was Ramses II, who is like the pharaoh that Moses went up against.
Yeah.
So that she reigned over a kingdom that was what's modern Turkey and Syria and Lebanon. So that huge, that's a lot of land mass.
Right.
So it was a big empire. And it was an empire that just kind of got lost to history, and she got really forgotten. She ruled for decades and decades. So she'd be like a household name like Elizabeth I or Cleopatra, except that her empire, literally, we had to excavate it. And it's really only in the last decade that people know about her or know about this culture in an accessible way. So it's fun writing fiction. But she was also a priestess who believed in all this fantasy, what we would call fantasy, what we would call magic. To her, it was the way the world worked.
Yeah.
So I combine those. And as is often true with fantasy, a character starts with a forbidden kind of magic and that's emerging, and then over the course of the series it gets ever more she climbs into ever more sorcerous activities, shall we say. I also have fantastic beasts that are also part of the artwork and history of this culture. These griffins come in and I have them as characters. So that's my crazy combination of history and fantasy all in one. And if you really are on the super fantasy loving, you might even start with the last book, because that's your thing.
Yeah, that's fascinating. What a fascinating marriage of genres and having it all come together. Thank you so much, Judith, for your time, for your story. Best of luck with everything. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you. Take care.